Hi Ivan, how's it going?
I'm good, Michael. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. And today we're talking about something that's, well, a little bit of speculation more than anything. The topic is one that was given to us by one of our listeners, and that is how is this general election going to affect the Scottish parliamentary election of 2016? So, Ivan, this is your crystal ball moment.
Yeah, absolutely. Crystal ball squared. We don't know what's going to happen in 2 weeks. Never mind what's going to happen in 12 months. But let's give it a bash for a bit of entertainment. Clearly, there's a number of scenarios as to how this Westminster election could pan out. And frankly, looking at over the last couple of days, all the projections based on all the polls from all the different polling companies and different people that do projections, they all can end up at the same place, which is, as things stand, nobody expects that Tories and the Lib Dems and DUP are probably going to fall short of a government, and the most likely is a Labour government that will rely on SNP votes. That's the most likely scenario. So how does that play for next year? Well, I think the SNP are very clear that they're going to make a constructive contribution to UK policy, economic policy and other policies, and be constructive in the way they work with whatever government's in place in Westminster. I think that of itself has got a number of advantages that play strongly for 2016 elections. The first is the SNP will be seen to be working at the UK level as a serious player, really, for the first time in terms of influencing UK government policy. So that's going to add to the credentials and enhance the credibility, I would say, of the SNP. They're going to be seen to be having some influence and to be able to operate at that level on macroeconomic policy, which, as I say, is going to enhance the credibility even further of the SNP government and its ability to operate in Holyrood. So that's all to the good. I think that the question then, in reality, if you look at Holyrood, the Tories will get the vote they've always got. The Lib Dems are going to find it very, very difficult next year, I've no doubt. And some of the other pro-Indy parties would hope, I think, to pick up some seats. The real question is going to come down to between SNP and Labour and how that's going to pan out. So the question really comes down to how would people view Scottish Labour? And if they're reduced to a rump of seats this time round, it really reduces their ability to campaign because they'll lose a lot of funding, they'll lose a lot of elected representatives, and by definition their support staff, that's a big part of their campaigning activity. So Labour's ability to mount a campaign next year could be severely dented. And I think if you look at it and say, well, if Ed Miliband is Prime Minister, does that help Scottish Labour next year? Well, the problem they've then got is that people in Scotland may say, well, do you know what? We quite fancy having an SNP government in Holyrood to continue that can negotiate for Scotland against a UK Labour government. So I think it's difficult to see a scenario, frankly, given where we are just now, that's going to play to Labour's advantage in Scotland ahead of 2016, whatever way you look at it. And a lot can change, but as we sit today, there's a lot of advantages there for the SNP in the run up to 2016.
What about a new leader for Labour?
Well, I think a new leader for Labour in Scotland, if that's what you're talking about,
Yeah.
Who knows? But frankly, I think it's pretty irrelevant. I mean, Jim Murphy's got his baggage, and people have got opinions of him, which on the pro-Indy side obviously aren't very high. If they replace him with someone else, is it going to make much of a difference to what effectively the people need to target, which is people that voted yes, historically voted Labour and are now voting SNP? Have they got somebody that can win those votes back? They might have, but I think it would take them more than 12 months to mount some credible recovery from where they're probably going to end up in a couple of weeks' time.
I read recently what you might call an outlying opinion on this matter. I don't know if you caught the article by Kenny Farquharson in The Scotsman that said having the SNP in power basically down in Westminster was going to change them. Maybe they'll become a unionist party. They'll have the joy of being part of that Westminster system and it's going to tame them. I think it was clutching at straws, but it'd be interesting to hear your opinion on it.
I've not heard that one before, and I suppose if you were looking at it from the other side and you were looking for straws to clutch at, that could be one. And clearly there's history if you go back through the history of Scotland sending elected or unelected representatives down to the seat of power in Westminster, then they've obviously historically ended up becoming part of the Westminster establishment. And that goes right back to the 18th century and the 17th century and right up to the 20th and the 21st century. I think the SNP elected representatives in Westminster understand very, very clearly what the job's about. And as you said, it's not to settle down, it's to settle up. And they'll understand very clearly that the centre of gravity is back in Scotland. And it's not, as Scottish Labour and others do, to go and settle down in London and enjoy the lifestyle down there. It's to go down there, do a job and come back up here as quickly as possible. So I don't think there's any risk of them becoming part of the establishment. I don't think there's any risk of them deciding that they want to settle down there. I think they'll be very clearly focused on the job at hand and what needs to be done to bring power back here and to ensure that there's an SNP government in Holyrood next year.
And just as a last wee question, have you ever been inside Westminster, inside the Houses of Parliament? I have, and my reaction wasn't one of being blown away by the majesty and the splendour of it. I actually thought, this is ridiculous, anachronistic rubbish, and the quicker we're out of it, the better.
No, absolutely, that's true. I think the actual chamber itself is actually a lot smaller than you expect it to be, from what I remember. I was in there a few years back on a tour, and I remember thinking, you see the television, it looks like a big space. When you're inside it, it's actually quite a small space, and they're really crammed in there. And it wasn't overpowering in the sense of imperial majesty, if you like. I think some of the other aspects of the establishment down there are pretty grand in scale in terms of the Treasury building and the Foreign Office and all this kind of stuff. They're designed to kind of impress on you the grandeur of empire, if you like, as was. But the actual chamber in the House of Commons itself is quite, as you say, anachronistic, out of touch, and frankly not that overwhelmingly impressive as you might expect.
It was the pageantry that got me. I remember seeing the Speaker having to do his kind of daily procession, followed by guys with various, weapons and traditional items. I remember the Speaker being vaguely embarrassed by the whole spectacle as about 50 Japanese tourists took about 100 photos. Surely this isn't the way to be doing politics in this period.
Oh my, yeah. I must say I've not witnessed that aspect of it. I'm probably glad I didn't. So there was nothing happening when I was down there. It was in recess when I had a wander round. But frankly, that kind of rubbish can be consigned to the tourist trail, along with all the other stuff to do, the changing of the guard and all this kind of stuff, which is all kind of laid on for the tourists. And frankly, tourists will love taking photographs of that stuff, but they've got, as I say, kind of relegate that to the tourist trail and get it divorced from the actual day-to-day running of the country and the politics, which is important. It needs to be done properly in a modern fashion. I believe they need to spend a bit of money to get the place brought up to spec, because the building's pretty old and run down in some ways. They should maybe take the opportunity to relocate the whole thing and build a nice modern Parliament building somewhere else that they can use as a much more modern way of doing politics. Would maybe be a good idea.
And on that bombshell, we'll leave it there for this episode. Thanks, Ivan.
Thank you.
Got a devil's haircut.